Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us for this webinar. My name is Naeem, and I'm the Senior Digital Marketing Executive here at ICOR. The topic of our webinar today will be achieving Agile SIAM. Before we get started today, I would like to mention the formats and etiquette for this webinar. It will be a 45-minute session, give or take. A recording of the webinar will be available afterwards, and due to a large audience, there will be no Q&A and in-webinar chats. If you have any questions, we will provide contact details at the end of the session so you can send them to us. Now, I will turn our attention to the speakers for today. Both Chris and Adam are senior consultants and are part of the ICOR leadership team. Chris has worked in IT and service management for the last 20 years. He has held senior positions at major blue chip companies and is a keen enthusiast for new technology and ways of working. Adam has worked in the organization for the past 12 years. He has a strong background in operational service delivery and has undertaken a number of transition and transformation programs, delivering new technology and modern ways of working in various organizations and industry sectors. I just wanted to give everyone an introduction to who we are. We are 25 years old. We helped organizations embed modern, effective approaches to IT service management, and we hold service integration and management experience in multiple sectors. Now that you have understood a little bit more about ICOR, I will now be handing over to Adam to get us underway today.
Thanks for the introductions there, Naeem. So just a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover on the session today. So we're going to discuss and talk about some of the industry challenges. The presentation today, it's intended to be thought-provoking and provide some insights, as well as describing the challenges faced by service management, when presented with a multitude of different frameworks, standards, and management approaches. So in doing so, we'll aim to provide some insights and practical considerations really based on our experience of how we've worked with a number of organizations. So we'll discuss what the SIAM and Agile models and approaches are, not in a great degree of detail, but just to kind of frame the context of the conversation. So the presentation today really presupposes some knowledge of SIAM and what the concepts and principles of Agile are. So we're not going to spend lots of time on that, but we will introduce some useful visuals just to kind of set the context. So we'll discuss the need for change, so why we need to change and perhaps how. So throughout, we're going to refer to the context in which the different approaches are applied. So, we're talking about complex organizations, many different vendors and service providers, and obviously organizations seeking competitive advantage, through faster paced delivery, also being presented all the time with different opportunities in digital business. So what we'll do is really reflect on our experiences. We're not going to prescribe a single solution. We'll present some of the models, the key points, discuss some of the implications and challenges and possible approaches that you might want to consider. We hope that we'll speak with knowledge and, recall our own practical experience, but it won't be a single best fit solution. So in terms of the sort of target audience, this is really to provide some considerations for service delivery practitioners and leaders negotiating their way around these models. We recognize that obviously SIAM as a model, it covers a broad spectrum of stakeholders and different roles, from the SIAM service provider to the vendors and partners themselves, and obviously the delivery organization facing off to the business. So we hope really in going through the discussion today that there's going to be learning points for each of the groups. So in terms of, the context, we know that sort of ITIL 4 is, gaining sort of momentum, in the industry at the moment. We won't spend a lot of time on ITIL 4, but we recognize there's obviously a broad spectrum of frameworks and models. Some organizations looking to optimize their use of ITIL processes, and obviously practice is now in the ITIL 4 model. And others might want to sort of leave that behind because they see that at odds with agile frameworks. But really, from an ICOR perspective, we maintain that a blended approach is often a pragmatic one. And where the most important element is practical experience of what's actually works in a SIAM environment. So we're not wedded to one approach, but we might talk about different different frameworks as we go through. And finally, if we don't hit all the the things that you were hoping or wanted to hear on the webinar today, we've got a wealth of material, case study material, white papers on different topics. So obviously, if you're interested in that, then get in touch. So why it's important, so a bit of sort of context setting really. So from a business perspective, a kind of a generic statement there, we deliver value to our customers, we're responsive to and adaptable to changing customer needs. So, that means, delivery of new products, new ways of doing business, new services. The service provider's response might be, well, yes, that's great because we work in an agile way, we've adopted agile, but really what does it mean? What sort of IT delivery organization needs to be in place, and have we got the right operating model in place to support it? So really, any review of a service provider's operating model or any sort of change in approach to service delivery has to have the organization's business drivers at its center. That's obvious. So whether we're talking about adopting SIAM or trying to be more agile, we need to do so with a clear view of how that's actually going to improve the service to the customer. So the service delivery organization has really elevated itself to a partner of the business. It's delivering value through innovation. It's delivering and supporting new technologies that improve speed, throughput, and even allowing the delivery of new products to the market, which actually are going to transform the business. So not just keeping the lights on. So the competitive advantage of the business always calls for more speed and agility in the service delivery organization. So value has to be delivered quickly, but also incrementally. So typically that means short release cycles, which means processes need to be flexible and adaptable. For example, take a release process, which only allows us to deliver quarterly, means the business won't stay competitive for very long. But that doesn't mean we don't need process governance and those, clear, effective processes to be in place, because that's going to help ensure quality products and services that are obviously fit for purpose. We work in a variety of different sizes and scales of organizations, but obviously in large and complex organizations, suppliers and vendors are numerous and likely to be widely distributed globally. For instance, they might operate according to different contracts, service levels, KPI measures. And sometimes the commercial framework doesn't always lend itself to being fast, flexible, and adaptable. In other words, agile. So really, SIAM identifies a model to manage some of that complexity. It places an integrator at the center, and we know there's different flavors of a SIAM model. We won't go into great depth about those today. But really, alongside that, agile development delivery requires a high degree of collaboration, and that's obviously placing a huge demand on our operating model. So I'll just hand over to Chris now, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about what a typical SIAM model might look like.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Okay, so Adam's already covered some of the key topics about why we're even discussing this on this webinar today. But I thought what would be useful from everyone's perspective, just to talk about what a traditional SIAM model really looks like, touch upon the various influences and pressures that we're seeing both from the two different types of agile. So that's both the kind of repetitive and faster to market development kind of approaches, and then the little a in terms of agile, how we continue to drive increased value and reduce cost across all of the ecosystem, including our vendors and suppliers. So this is on the screen is a typical high-level SIAM model that we've developed for clients. It may not match what you're doing today, and everyone is going to be different. There is no one size fits all in terms of what a SIAM model should look like. It's very much dependent upon your business goals and how high or low you want to do in terms of management of your vendors and the services they're providing. It's all about that level of what we call a watermark. So in this particular model here, we've clearly got some key business functions, and typically there could be things like engineering, design, production, those types of functions that you see across a lot of businesses as we move forward. And previously, those kind of business functions had been used to managing vendors directly. So they would be negotiating with vendors, they'll be putting contracts in place, and they would be managing very niche delivery into those specific functions, which potentially didn't address or consider issues outside of it and ways of which they were needed to be integrated across the business. So what evolved was this creation of a SIAM entity, and the blue box there in the middle is kind of what has been implemented in a lot of organizations as either a retained organization or as a SIAM based delivery mechanism. And here we have a set of roles across the service delivery chain that are very focused on managing and ensuring that this is services and vendors that we get from either one or even multiple vendors are being delivered to the right quality against the right deliverables and at the right cost. So what we're trying to do here is ensure that we get the right focus on. So we have some roles in terms of service delivery managers. We have service owners who are responsible in looking at the overall service across end to end. While those service delivery managers typically are ensuring for services that are aligned to one or more particular functions. But having that entity in those roles is great, but you need to make sure that you have a close relationship to the way that you bring projects and new services into the environment. And that is all done through the service introduction piece and service architecture, which is normally aligned to your project framework. And then, of course, you kind of got the overall governance piece that goes with that, about making sure that services are being delivered to targets, that we're having frequent reviews of vendors, we're looking at ways to improve and drive improvements across the piece, and looking at ways of which we can take overall cost out. And it's a fairly large ecosystem that's been around for quite a few years now and pretty well understood, although a number of companies constantly go through this and continue to review actually how much of the service they place with their vendors to reduce overall cost to them and as part of the overall total cost of ownership. So that's great, but actually we've got a number of additional forces that are now coming to it. So if I just move on to what we traditionally call the Agile project management development model. So this is a typical model that I'm sure a lot of you will be very familiar, those that have been working in the Agile world for a while. And again, it's a typical model that we've developed with our clients. And again, not one size fits all, but I think in terms of the general approach and release life cycle for this type of environment, this is pretty standardized. So we have a backlog of product ideas or new requirements that come through. And that generates into something that's called a product backlog. They then get looked at, they get reviewed, they get prioritized, looking at which ones are quickest to implement, which ones will add the most value to the business. And then from that, we kind of get a release backlog. That is then broken down into a series of actual activities that within a 2 to 4 week period, which is traditionally called a sprint, with some clear goals at the end of that. And then we have the whole Scrum team type concepts that within that kind of do the usual design, develop, test, demo, and then ultimately release the product into the marketplace. And then potentially we get further feedback and that goes back into the overall funnel. So it's a continuous development and feedback loop mechanism. But this whole approach is actually introducing a set of new stakeholders in the end-to-end delivery chain, and people that perhaps traditionally were just seen as external to the overall model. And we now need to bring them into the fold and make sure we're working with them on a much closer basis than we've done previously. So we have the concept of the product owner, who's really there to understand what the customer wants, what their needs are, and the value that's going to bring to them as a business, so they can translate that back to the overall Scrum team and ensure that everyone understands what it is we're trying to develop at the end of the day. We have the Scrum Masters, who are really there to make sure the team stays on track and that they remove any roadblocks or issues and risks that would impede the overall delivery of that sprint goal within that time frame. And of course, then we have the cross-functional development teams, who are really empowered to actually deliver the agreed tasks within a sprint. They're given that autonomous delivery mechanism to make sure that they can deliver to time. So clearly, I mean, this is a pretty well trusted method, but actually, if you start to introduce this within an overall SIAM model, now you've got development on a regular basis in a continuous loop, trying to make sure that potentially understand the impact across multiple suppliers and making sure that everyone needs to be part of that so they can participate together to ensure that overall smooth delivery. And that is a big challenge. But in addition, in terms of, I talked about this earlier, right? We had the big A, we've also got the little a in terms of Agile, which is about actually how do we increase value to the business? So how do we drive those efficiencies across the end-to-end service delivery chain? And a lot of that's about ensuring that we got clear accountabilities and responsibilities with the right level of empowerment and trust to achieve the right outcomes, and potentially moving away from some of the old mechanisms of really managing suppliers on a almost service level by service level basis. If we're going to really drive the value chain and then streamline that from an end-to-end perspective, we need to start empowering people and start giving them a level of trust if we want to increase the overall efficiency and the speed of delivery, while also improving the overall quality, but at the same time reducing cost. If we're going to do that, everyone needs to be focused on the end goals and, more importantly, the end outcomes of what it is we're trying to achieve. So all of these different factors and forces are now playing against each other, and we bring a lot of challenges to what we traditionally viewed as the SIAM model. So what I want to just briefly touch upon are actually taking that view, what do we need to change in order to be successful and adopt this kind of Agile SIAM approach? So really, there are kind of 5 key flavors of these. So firstly, there's a kind of collaboration. We can no longer really just be focused about service levels and changes and KPIs. And while they're still going to be really important to a business, and it's important we understand them, we need to be much more focused about the actual end products and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We need greater collaboration across every vendor in that service delivery chain that has traditionally just delivered or been predominantly focused on their individual services and what they're contracted to. Again, that's really easy to say, but it does require fundamental changes to the commercial approaches that we've traditionally put in place previously. And we'll talk some more about that shortly. And of course, it's all right having a commercial approach and everyone agrees we could collaborate, but actually we need, therefore, if we're going to be more efficient, we're going to drive greater automation, we need to have much tighter integration across our standard processes. And again, we need to be more flexible, focused on the end service delivery and quality, and less around KPIs. Although I will say you should never lose sight of your KPIs. They're still a fundamental part of your service delivery chain. Again, obviously, closer collaboration is key to that, and involving all of the vendors and your suppliers in the design and working of their processes early on is fundamental to how you really make that work. There's a kind of governance piece as well that says, okay, so you're working people together, you got a greater process. Actually, you need to start looking at how we help them achieve that and remove the issues and barriers that typically happen when you've moved away from your typical organizational constructs. So the SIAM organization really needs to move away from being focused around pure supply compliance and challenging suppliers to be faster, quicker, cheaper, and more about becoming an enabler to help them overcome issues in terms of delivery and any risks, and be a constant champion for driving that improved quality and efficiency. They need to establish clear working mechanisms where everyone can work together and we have that greater empowerment and trust so that we all understand we're working for the same common goal. At the same time, therefore, you also need to make sure that your tooling supports and underpins all of that. You need to make sure that perhaps your tooling takes account for some of these quicker development methodologies and has clear mechanisms for understanding and driving out cost controls. And typically you'll find a lot of the service management tool sets are really embracing this type of area now. Certainly the likes of, the big boys, the ServiceNows, the BMCs, even some of the smaller ones are really starting to drive that through. But unless you've kind of got the process and the governance and the collaboration in place to really support that, you're going to have a challenge. So you need to make sure that you build the framework around all of that to be able to support that. And of course, everything I've just talked about, it's all about behaviors. It's all about making sure everyone works together to deliver those outcomes and that benefit the value and deliver the value to the business in the best fashion possible. And of course, the challenge with all of this is about how do you change your commercial framework that you've got all these competing end goals from various vendors that have their standard cost models, that have their standard KPIs, but now you're asking them almost to rip that up and work together in a much more collaborative fashion. So how do you do that and make it still work? So what I'm going to do now, I hope that's given you a flavor of this kind of challenges and things in our view that really need to change to make that happen. Adam will now take you through some of the lessons and experiences we've got around putting it into practice.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the insights there. So putting it into practice. So in terms of designing the SIAM model, obviously practices and processes need to be agile, encourage open communication across the vendors, but how can we achieve that? So really, I think it starts with the definition of what the business services are and how the service towers contribute to delivering that service. Sometimes, vendors may have a narrow focus. For instance, they provide network infrastructure that enables the business requires, and they do so in accordance with some SLAs and KPIs. But is there a real understanding of what the business context is? So in other words, how the vendors enable the delivery of the value to the customers and consumers, and how that's brought together in this SIAM model. So how services are organized and aligned to the business functions, perhaps grouped into portfolios with clear ownership, starts to be a really important feature of an effective SIAM model. So, considering the development of service sort of portfolios of services, which can be defined and which ensure that all the sort of technology and the applications in use by a business function and supporting a business outcome are all sort of well understood, and the service owners in place. But also, there's both an operational and a strategic outlook, in terms of aligning development in technology and the improvement of service to the objectives of the business. So really, it's key that understanding those service relationships is really a foundation to being adaptable to the needs of the business. The organizational structure and design of the SIAM model, therefore, needs to promote that flexibility, quick decision-making and turnaround, sharing of ideas, enable self-forming teams to come together. And that can't really happen when there's a large degree of bureaucracy. We've got complex processes, many layers of management and decision-making hierarchies, sort of complex reporting. So those kind of things are really hampering momentum, speed, and innovation. So from a design in the SIAM model, the key takeaway really is that, we've clearly identified the service relationships and how they map to the business outcomes. So we talked a bit about processes and governance still being important. And that's just what I wanted to talk a little bit about now. So processes and governance measures that support agile ways of working sometimes might be ignored. You know, we might have this built up, this idea that speed supersedes the need for quality, but obviously that can't be the case. So in sort of areas like service transition and service assurance, that they can sometimes be overlooked, but they're really key elements ensuring smooth progression of test to live, you know, and services that are reliable. So whereas governance and control might be seen as a blocker and something that might be, you know, an unnecessary hindrance to introducing new products and services, that's really a challenge for SIAM. You know, for example, a change and release process that has long lead times, you know, laborious service transition processes with, you know, very, very detailed service acceptance criteria and service impact assessment templates. That's really going to discourage the use of those processes. So really in effective SIAM, we should encourage, you know, regular communication, as we said, between all the key parties, and always sort of, you know, ask the question of ourselves, you know, the questions we're asking, are they sort of relevant to the product or service being introduced? So kind of start to come up with a concept around the sort of minimum viable amount of information that's required to provide some assurance on risk, you know, security, supportability, cost control, those types of things, you know, without compromising the speed of delivery. And once we've kind of established that, we need to obviously socialize that and publish that to, you know, all the parties that are concerned. So our processes in the SIAM model need to be designed with just enough control, we would say. So that's a key principle of Agile, really, which is to tune, adopt, and optimize based on, you know, real world experience. So really, this concept of minimum viable process is process that has enough value that people are going to use it, and also allows a feedback, or provides a feedback loop to guide the future design and development. So that needs to be made sort of transparent in terms of what that minimum viable process is. And that's important from a service owner perspective, product owners, and delivery managers across the vendors. So from a process and governance perspective, so, you know, this concept of an MVP, a minimum viable process, not product in this case, which is just enough to be meaningful, effective. And we talked a little bit earlier about how one size doesn't fit all. So, you know, in the SIAM model, the integrator really needs to have a good understanding of what's important to the customer. That's clear. And that means how services are delivered may, you know, vary depending on the profile of that product and service, what the business criticality is, what type of customers are using it. For example, in, you know, availability and reliability more important than new product features? An obvious example there would be, you know, a system supporting financial management where availability and reliability, you know, might be more important, as opposed to maybe launching a new marketing app where product features are going to be more important. But in all cases, you know, our overall model must ensure, you know, that effectiveness and efficiency aren't sort of sacrificed, just, you know, in a desire to be agile or say we're agile. You know, governance and processes required, sometimes more, sometimes less. And similarly, you know, just because, you know, we've got an agile process, that doesn't mean, you know, it lacks control if it's been appropriately designed. So in terms of the key roles across the SIAM model, you know, have we defined what they are, from the service owners to the SDMs, process owners and delivery leads within each vendor? So still understanding, you know, the demarcation of responsibilities is important to allow those relationships to be developed. So we're not saying that everyone does everything. You know, we're saying that it's still important to define the roles and responsibilities, and really in how they collaborate, you know, towards the common goal of the business outcomes. So if we take an example of, you know, a product owner versus a service owner, or how those two roles work together, and that's key really in this model. We talked a little bit earlier about product owners being responsible for, you know, understanding the business needs in terms of product innovation, managing, prioritizing product backlogs, you know, delivering new features and functionality so the business remains competitive. The service owner, on the other hand, may value, you know, stability and availability and the security of the services, you know, the underpinning infrastructure, applications, network, and so on. They're going to enable the delivery of that product. But in an agile model, a good one, that relationship needs to be well developed, and there needs to be regular dialogue between the two. And the service owner themselves need to support and even drive innovation with the service towers. So the SIAM model can help map out those relationships, and then we can start to see how they're going to contribute value to the business. But that really means that, in our traditional SIAM model, the service delivery roles may need to be adapted to be more agile. So service managers, for instance, are now responsible to apply agile practices to IT service management, assisting with this, concept of identifying the minimum viable process. And sometimes, having a role that's similar to what a Scrum Master would be doing in a development team. So really facilitating involvement in that team, helping the team to succeed, not necessarily leading authoritatively, protecting the interests of the team, removing the impediments to success, that sort of thing. And sort of facilitating agile service management events, so different ways of doing things, stand-ups, that sort of thing, and a different, if we look at some of the ceremonies within Scrum or whatever, some of that can maybe translate into how we work in service management and service delivery, and clearly working closely with agile process owners. Similarly, process owners, working closely with the service managers, service delivery managers, and so on. But maybe, even collecting process user stories and developing a process backlog, if you like, for process improvements, identifying just enough process. And again, that's kind of an equivalent role, therefore, to development's product owner. So really creating and maintaining the process models and ensuring that sort of continual improvement and value creation through the process itself. So from a SIAM roles perspective, we need to identify the key roles, responsibilities, and again, the relationships. So people and skills, therefore, becomes really important in the SIAM model to support agile ways of working. And sometimes, potentially different modes of operation for different services and products, and that needs skilled people. We're dealing with sort of uncertainty, but different ways of doing things. So bimodal ways of operating, and having some agile alongside some more sort of traditional methods of delivery. So yes, we might have agile teams. They contain highly skilled developers. We've got our Scrum experts in place, product owners leading on innovation. And we have a SIAM model that's establishing ownership, process, and governance. But we also need the service delivery professionals we put in that organization to have highly developed leadership skills. They're adept at decision making, communication, influencing. So really some of the softer skills come to the fore, and that's really important when building the SIAM model, the service integrator role, and deciding what sort of what sort of people are required in there. So key takeaway, we need adaptable people, and we need a broad range of skills. Obviously, we've got some specialist technical skills across the model, but in terms of effective service integration and management, we need those that broad range of skills and some of the softer skills of our service delivery professionals. So in terms of decision making and empowerment, so clearly empowering people and teams and having the right the right environment to facilitate collaborative ways of working becomes really important, and that's cost effective as well, way of working, providing that's that's organized and delivered appropriately. So in our SIAM model, we need to sort of develop that atmosphere to encourage the likes of encouraged by the likes of the service managers and service owners and process owners to really start to challenge how things are done and how services and process can be improved, and that's across the model. So we need to think about what forums are needed. We need to think about how we're going to sort of target the teams around what the outcomes are. So delegation and encouraging managing teams becomes really important. So in terms of continual service improvements, obviously that's really a key theme throughout. So sometimes that's difficult to achieve, when we've got a model where we've got the different components of end-to-end service, they're managed by different providers, different partners. And improvements, it's easy to sort of see improvements related to specific supported components. For example, an infrastructure provider might want, to improve server response times or, increase capacity to assist with throughput. But again, how is that really translating to the business service? And how is that delivering an improvement to customer satisfaction? We always need to link back any service improvements to that. So clearly the service managers and the different roles within the SIAM organization, they need to be aligned to the business services, and they need to have a clear picture, of how the different vendors contribute to, and interact to improve that overall service quality. And clearly each provider in that model needs to understand how they contribute too. And there's some practical ways, in which some of the teachings of Agile and tools and techniques can be used when planning and managing service improvements. For instance, we can take an approach where, developing user stories which identify, a persona, a goal, and an outcome that can help. And also considering sort of structuring work into sprints with clear goals and outcomes. And that really engenders, collaborative ways of working. We can use Kanban boards, to get partners on the same page, working towards a common goal. So, but alongside this, working sort of at a faster speed, less predictability, maybe structure presents a sort of risk in people's minds. It takes them out of their comfort zone. And we all know, working in our own organizations, change isn't always embraced. People become very accustomed to their role, working with processes or practices that they're very familiar with, and they might not have been questioned up until now. So, if organizations are obviously going to remain competitive, it's not only the product and services that are delivered to the customer that need to enhance, but it's also the processes and procedures that support them. They need to be constantly questioned and improved too. So from a continual service improvements perspective, we can use some of the Agile techniques to organize our SIMs. So in terms of tooling and integration, it's an area we've touched upon, but we clearly need well-suited service management tool sets, and they're going to allow us to develop these service relationships, map them, understand them. For instance, applications are related to the underpinning infrastructure as well as the business services they're contributing to. And there should be clear ownership. We've talked about that. So therefore, effectively modeling the services in the service management tool set, is also going to allow for service or portfolio cost visibility, how our resources are used to deliver these services. So the tools available now really give us, the ability to have a delivery of have a view of the delivery pipeline of new services and new products alongside, the operational service or the run services that we're delivering as well. We've long been able to, relate incidents, problems, and changes to services, use that data to provide insights into performance and quality and so on, and that's still important. But now we've got some, it's common to have other tool sets that are specific to supporting Agile ways of working and even DevOps models, and they need to be understood too within the SIAM model. So really, there might be numerous tools that are actually starting to be used to deliver, for similar purposes. So therefore, tooling strategy is really a key challenge for leadership. It's important to set that strategy and ensure there's a right level of visibility of all the work going on within, a service or a portfolio. So in our experience, it's important to be clear how each tool is obviously going to be used, in development and in operations. Take care not to duplicate effort, make sure production issues, impacting live service have the appropriate level of visibility. That's still key, and that's really important. We can build integrations where it makes sense. For example, service impacting incidents might be related to a product defect, where that product has already been released to the customer, i.e. where it's having an operational or service impact. So really, in effective SIAM, it's important that solution and service architects are really working closely together. We've got a strategy for tooling, and it's an appropriate strategy. So tooling integration that's fit for purpose across the model. In terms of contracts and commercial, this is a really important element. So services obviously need to be fit for purpose. They need to be fit for use, those utility and warranty aspects of a service, and they're often the foundation of how contracts are built. But really, you know, in an agile world, you know, the needs of the customer are going to evolve over time. So sometimes it's not, you know, necessarily appropriate to have absolutely everything set in stone from the outset. So we need to carefully construct the contracts. You know, we may ensure that the suppliers we select are responsive, even willing to take some risk too. And really that kind of links into a key agile principle, which is this concept of customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And that's really important in the service delivery space as well. We need the right behaviors. The KPIs we've got in place and service targets obviously need to drive those desired behaviors and not just be around volumetrics, so around behaviors and ways of working. And some of the improvements, you know, might be focused on, you know, how we work in a more collaborative way and have some statements within our contracts with different vendors to actually, you know, introduce those types of things. So in terms of, obviously, all of this depends on effective communication and needs an effective way of sort of communicating this across the organization. And that can happen on a number of different levels in a SIAM approach that values agility. So effective communications, that's the model itself and some of the values of Agile. You know, some of these concepts that might not be familiar to everyone across the organization, you know, we need some sort of a training program to be in place, or at least a way to communicate and share information. You know, the roles and responsibilities across the model and how people fit in and how their roles might need to change needs to be communicated and defined. And obviously the working relationships within the model. So in terms of the context and other sort of frameworks and approaches that might be gathering momentum, you know, we've touched a little bit upon ITIL 4 at the top of the conversation. And ITIL 4, you know, tries to tell us about, you know, value streams and outcomes, the dimensions of service management. So, you know, the organizations and people, you know, the information technology partners and suppliers and value streams and processes. And it's that final one really that tries to uplift ITIL into this world, really. So like we say, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about ITIL, but just that it's there for some maybe some learning points that provide some guidance around this, and has been kind of adapted and uplifted around sort of SIAM and some of the concepts around lean and agility, and how the practices obviously in ITIL 4, not the processes in the old framework, you know, can be made more lean and agile, really, particularly around sort of change management. So there is some guidance that could be provided there. You know, we'd be obviously happy to provide any further information about that. So I'm going to hand back over to Chris now, who's going to sort of pull some of this together and close the conversation out. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I hope we've really given you a flavour of what Agile SIAM is really about, and the kind of way that you really need to change from a business perspective. There's a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge here that we've gained with our clients over a number of years, and it's difficult to articulate that and translate that on a 40-minute call. But clearly, Agile is not going to go away. Agile is going to continue to grow, become a key factor for our businesses for quite a long while in the future now. And that's whether that be Agile with a big A or Agile with a little a. And we need to have a think about how we integrate that and build that into our overall SIAM approach, that we deliver both sides of the requirement at the same time, as well as ensuring that we still got the right levels of control around it. But, you know, it's a fundamental new approach that we need here. And it's a fundamental new approach for contracts, behaviors, the different roles that Adam's alluded to, and the whole kind of delivery life cycle. It isn't just a case of thinking about, actually, we just need to write a bit of a contract here and making sure that that addresses some of these concerns. You need to have a look at your whole end-to-end delivery life cycle and your tooling landscape and the way your processes are across your whole ecosystem. Unfortunately, it's not something, though, that there's a one-size-fits-all. We said that at the beginning, and that's still true. That, you know, you cannot just take something off the shelf, a standard blueprint, and make it work. Every business has their own agenda, has their own values, has their own requirements, and therefore need to be adaptive in the way that you would take this on and adopt it. This isn't a selling call, but clearly we have done a number of engagements with various clients across various industries over the many years we've been in place. And clearly, you know, just looking at some of the things, not just in the Agile SIAM world, but in terms of things from operating model design, looking at digital service management, looking at vendor and multi-vendor supplier management. You got challenges in any of that, then please get in touch, because we can do and help you address all of those challenges that you've got in a very pragmatic way. Because although we'll talk to things like ITIL 4, COBIT, all of those other frameworks, will do what's right for you as a business. So with that, I want to say thank you for your time today. Please get in touch ultimately if you need some more assistance in this conversation. And I'll just closing comments from Naeem.
Thank you both, Adam and Chris. Yeah, just to reiterate here that we'll be sending all attendees a recording of today's webinar. Also, if you have any sort of further questions, we'll be happy to answer them, but please use the contact details mentioned below, and look out for our next webinar in early 2022. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to hosting you again very soon.